She gave her last $10 to a stranger at the train station. Cold broke and with nowhere to go. Later, he came back as a millionaire and changed everything. This isn't just chance, it's a heartwarming love story that will stay with you. Where are you watching from and what time of day is it right now? The rain hadn't let up since sunrise. It wasn't the kind of soft drizzle that made people feel poetic. It was the sharp, bone-soaking kind that cut through layers of wool and cotton and patience. The train station, tucked between two crumbling brick buildings on the edge of downtown, echoed with the distant clatter of heels on wet tile and the occasional announcement over the speakers that no one really listened to. There were puddles in every dip of the concrete floor, and the gray morning light filtering through the high windows made everything look colder than it already felt. May Brooks stood just under the narrow awning outside the platform entrance, trying to warm her fingers in her coat pockets, though she knew it was useless. Her coat wasn't made for weather like this. It wasn't made for anything really except pretending you were still doing fine when you weren't. Her hands curled tighter around the crumpled paper ticket in her right pocket and the single $10 bill in her left. She'd counted it 5 times that morning, like it might magically become more. It hadn't. That $10 was supposed to be her meal after the job interview. One small meal. Not even something hot, just something to make her stomach stop growling long enough to get through the afternoon. But now, with the train due in less than 10 minutes, she could already feel her stomach turning tight and sour with more than just hunger. Her eyes flicked up to the arrival board and then back down again. Still on time. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, trying to keep moving, keep the blood flowing. The job interview was across the city, and if she missed this train, she didn't have the fare to try again tomorrow. That job, even if it was just temp office work, was the last thread she had. Everything else had unraveled already. The eviction, her mother's funeral bills, the temp agency, losing her file, her phone dying for good 2 weeks ago. Now, it was just her, a borrowed coat, and a little bit of sarcasm left to keep her upright. A voice interrupted her thoughts. Soft, hesitant. "Excuse me." She turned a little too fast, like someone who was used to being startled. The man standing a few feet away looked worse than she did, which was saying something. Rain had soaked through his threadbare jacket, plastering the sleeves to his arms. His beard was uneven, his skin pale beneath the wet, but it was his eyes that held her attention. Pale blue, tired, not frantic like some she'd seen on the street, but weighted with something else. Shame, maybe. Or the kind of sadness that makes a person stop asking for help. I'm sorry, he said again, almost whispering. Someone stole my wallet. I just need $10 to get home. I swear I'll pay you back. If you could just trust me. May blinked, stunned by how ordinary the moment was. No drama, no shouting, no con. Just this man standing there shivering in the rain, asking for what she only barely had to give. $10. The last of her money. The gap between her and not eating. Between her and falling off the edge she'd been balancing on for months. Her first instinct was to walk away. People lied all the time. She knew that. She had been lied to plenty, even by people who looked a lot more put together than him. But she didn't walk. Instead, she looked at him harder, noticed the way his lips were trembling, the way his hands clutched the strap of his small backpack like it held his whole life. And something in her, something not logical, not safe, not smart, paused. "Do you have a phone?" she asked, keeping her voice guarded. He shook his head. "Dead. I tried a few people. No one wanted to talk. I get it." "And how do I know you're not lying?" she pressed. "You don't," he admitted with a small, miserable smile. "But I swear, I just want to get home." May swallowed hard. Her fingers tightened around the $10 bill in her pocket, feeling every wrinkle in it, like it was part of her own skin. She thought of her mother's voice, the last voicemail still saved in her old phone. The one that said, "Don't stop being kind, baby, even when the world stops deserving it." She sighed. "This is crazy," she muttered to herself, pulling out the bill. The man watched her hand like it might vanish. His eyes widened as she held it out. "I don't know why I'm doing this," she said, her voice a little shaky. "But I believe you." He took it carefully like it might break. "Thank you," he said, voice cracking. "I promise I'll pay you back." May gave a half smile. "Just get where you need to go." The train hissed into the station behind them. The man glanced toward it, nodded once, and disappeared into the crowd without another word. Within moments, he was gone. May stood there for a second longer, feeling the cold air rush in behind him. Her stomach growled almost as if in protest. She checked her ticket again. Her train was next. She stepped onto the platform, shoes, squeaking coat dripping, and sat down near a window. As the train pulled away, the platform fading behind streaks of rain on the glass, May let herself breathe. She didn't know if she had done the right thing. She just knew she hadn't been able to look away. That something in her still believed that kindness wasn't wasted even when it felt like it. And somewhere deep down, a whisper of something else stirred. Not hope exactly, but maybe the space where hope might grow if given a little time. The train ride hadn't warmed her. If anything, it made the emptiness louder. May Brooks sat by the window, her coat still damp, her fingers tucked into her sleeves for warmth. Her stomach had long given up growling and settled into a silent ache, as if understanding there were no answers coming anytime soon. She watched the city blur past buildings and trees swallowed by rain, and with every mile the memory of the $10 bill tugged at her. Not with regret. It was something quieter than that. A question maybe, or a whisper of something that hadn't formed into words yet. The train jolted, the speaker crackled, and the announcer's voice reminded everyone to check for personal belongings. May clutched her worn canvas bag tighter, not because it held anything of real value, just 2 resumes already wrinkled, a water bottle, and a broken umbrella, but because it was all she had left that was still hers. She arrived at the office building 20 minutes late. The receptionist's smile was tight like a rubber band about to snap. Blonde, mid-30s, immaculately dressed in a blazer too expensive for her salary, and with a tone that said she'd had just enough of the world for today. "I'm sorry, Miss Brooks," she said, already turning back to her monitor. "The interviewer had another meeting. You'll have to reschedule." May explained carefully clearly. The rain, the late train, the walk from the station because she didn't have change for the bus. She even offered to wait to sit quietly, whatever it took. But the woman's eyes didn't shift from the screen. "We'll call you," she said, but they wouldn't. They never did. May stood there for a beat longer, soaked sleeves clinging to her forearms, hair sticking to her cheek, her shoes making that quiet squish with every shift of weight. A young man in a pressed shirt and khakis walked past, got a friendly nod, and disappeared into the hallway. May turned around and left without another word. Back outside, the rain had lessened to a drizzle, but the wind was sharper now, slicing through the fabric of her coat. She didn't have anywhere to go except the rented room that had stopped feeling like a home weeks ago. The walk took 30 minutes. Her socks were wet. Her knees ached. The building looked the same, beige and tired, but there was a figure waiting near her door. The landlord. Arms crossed, gaze hard, voice clipped. May rent was due 3 days ago. She nodded, heart already sinking. "I know. I'm trying to. You said that last week. I can't keep making exceptions. I have someone who wants the room." He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just stated facts. It was worse that way. Like the decision had already been made hours ago, and this moment was just protocol. May didn't argue. What was there to say? She nodded again, quieter this time, and pushed open the door. She packed slowly. There wasn't much. 2 pairs of jeans, 3 shirts, 1 sweater, her phone charger, even though the phone itself no longer held charge, a photo of her mother that had started curling at the edges, a small notebook with a broken spine, and a black pen missing its cap. She folded the clothes, neatly zipped her bag, and stepped outside without looking back. That night, she found a covered bus stop and curled up on the bench, hugging her bag to her chest. The metal was cold and unforgiving. The smell of exhaust lingered in the air, and the fluorescent light overhead flickered just enough to keep sleep away. She sat upright until the buses stopped running and then lay down, pulling her coat tighter. It wasn't the first time she'd been in that position, but it was the first time it felt permanent. The next morning, she walked to the public library. It was warm, had free Wi-Fi and bathrooms with running water. It was a sanctuary for many like her. She tried to stay unnoticed, settling into a corner seat behind the travel books, but eventually one of the staff came by. Polite, but firm. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but this isn't a shelter." She had heard of others, mostly older white men, who were allowed to nap quietly, especially during the holidays, but she was not one of them. She smiled thinly, thanked the woman, and left. She spent the day walking, not because she had a destination, but because stopping meant thinking, and thinking hurt. The ache in her feet slowly overtook the hunger in her stomach. Her mind tried to wander to escape, but even her imagination felt tired. Around noon, she passed a bakery where someone had tossed out a half-eaten sandwich still in its wrapper. She stared at it for a long time before walking away, not because she was above it, but because it felt like a line. and she wasn't ready to cross it. Not yet. That evening, she sat on the steps of a laundromat that stayed open late. The rhythmic thump of machines behind her window lulled her into something like stillness. She watched people come and go, folding their warm clothes into clean bags, children skipping beside them, laughter echoing off the sidewalk. She didn't envy them. Not exactly. But she remembered being one of them once, and that remembering stung in a way that hunger never did. At some point, she opened her notebook and scribbled a line she wasn't sure she'd remember later: bachelor's degree in surviving on instant noodles and invisible tears, minor in public restroom etiquette. She smiled at the absurdity of it just a little. Humor had always been her flotation device. Even now, she reached for it like a reflex, like prayer, like breath. That night, she slept sitting up, her head against the wall, her knees pulled in, one arm looped through her bag's strap like an anchor. Morning came slowly. The sky was gray again, like the weather couldn't quite let go of its mood. She walked again, past the park, past the closed coffee shops, past the people who looked past her. She stopped in front of a store window, displaying mannequins in crisp business suits. She adjusted her reflection in the glass, tried to see something other than tired eyes and chapped lips. She whispered to herself, "Just one break, just one person to see me as something other than a burden." But no one did. By noon, her legs were trembling. Her back ached. She sat on a bench and watched a child feed pigeons with a bag of crumbs. The pigeons gathered quickly, fighting over each piece. She understood that scramble. She'd felt it in every job application, every cold call, every smile she had to fake for people who thought kindness was a transaction. Eventually, the child's mother pulled him away. The pigeons scattered, and May sat alone again. She pulled her coat tighter, leaned back against the bench, and closed her eyes. She didn't sleep. Not really. Just let herself float. Let the exhaustion win for a while. The sun was already dipping by the time she opened them again. Her stomach cramped. Her hands were numb. She stood up, brushed off the crumbs that weren't there, and kept walking. There was no revelation, no sudden solution, just movement, just surviving the day. But even that felt like a quiet act of rebellion. She didn't know it yet, but something would shift soon. A voice, a gesture, a paper bag. But tonight all she had was cold air, sore feet, and the memory of a $10 bill she had once given away without knowing why. And somehow, even in the heaviness of that memory, there was still something close to dignity. The morning started like most others, lately cold gray and indifferent. May Brooks sat on a wooden bench near the north end of Highland Park, hugging her knees, her coat zipped up to her chin. The bench was damp. Everything was damp. Her socks were soaked through her fingers, stiff with cold, and the pit in her stomach had grown numb from too many hours without food. She had been sitting in that same spot since before sunrise, watching the city wake up like a machine that didn't care whether she was in it or not. She tried not to resent the joggers passing by with earbuds and sleek jackets, or the mothers pushing strollers without so much as a glance in her direction. But she noticed, and the noticing ached in places deeper than hunger. May tried to distract herself, counting cracks in the pavement, watching a squirrel dig through a patch of dead leaves, then giving up and pulling her coat tighter as the wind picked up. She let out a dry chuckle that didn't quite make it past her lips. "If I ever write a memoir," she muttered to herself, "I'm calling it How to Starve Gracefully in Public." The sound of her own voice startled her. It had been days since she'd spoken to anyone for longer than a sentence. Her voice felt out of place, like it belonged to someone else now. That was when she noticed the woman. She walked slowly, deliberately, her steps careful over the uneven path. She looked to be in her 70s, maybe older, with a wool shawl draped over her shoulders and gloves that looked hand-knitted. Her silver hair was tucked under a cap, and in her hand she held a small brown paper bag. There was nothing flashy about her, but everything about her presence was intentional. She paused just a few feet from May's bench, not intrusive, but close enough to be noticed. Her eyes, a soft shade of hazel, rested on May, not with pity, not with alarm, but with a kind of quiet recognition. May held her breath, unsure whether to look away or brace for some well-meaning lecture. "You look hungry," the woman said, not unkindly. Her voice was gentle, but clear, not quite a question, not quite a judgment. May hesitated. The words hit something in her, not because they were wrong, but because they were true, in a way no one had bothered to acknowledge in days. "I'm fine," she answered automatically, though the sharp cramp in her stomach made the lie almost laughable. The woman didn't flinch or look away. Instead, she sat down beside her carefully like she'd done it before. She placed the brown paper bag on the bench between them and slowly opened it. Inside was a thick sandwich ham and cheese, unevenly cut but clearly fresh. There was a smear of mustard along the edge of the wax paper, and the smell hit May with an almost dizzying wave of longing. "I bring an extra one every day," the woman said simply, "just in case someone needs to feel human again." May blinked, unsure what part of the gesture hit her hardest, the food, the words, or the fact that the stranger hadn't recoiled from sitting next to someone who probably smelled like every bad decision she'd been forced to make this week. Her fingers twitched toward the bag, then pulled back. "I can't take that," she murmured, ashamed by how much she wanted to. "Why not?" the woman asked, not unkindly. "Is your pride bigger than your hunger?" May gave a breath of something between a laugh and a sigh. "I don't even know what I've got left bigger than anything," she said, her voice quieter now. They sat in silence for a beat. The wind picked up, rustling the dead leaves and flapping the edge of the woman's shawl. Then May reached for the sandwich. Her hands trembled as she unwrapped it. The first bite was almost painful, the way it hit her stomach, like fire on ice. Tears stung her eyes before she could stop them. "Thank you," she said, her voice cracking. The woman nodded. "There's a place on Jefferson and Monroe, Hearthstone Soup Kitchen. They serve lunch every day, but they're always short on help. You look like someone who could use a warm place and a reason to be in it." May looked at her, measuring the offer, trying to find the catch. "They let people volunteer. Like me." The woman smiled, lines deepening around her eyes. "Ask for Oliver. Tell him Nora sent you." And just like that, she stood. She didn't linger. She didn't ask for thanks or offer empty encouragements. She just walked away, the paper bag now empty, her steps just as deliberate as before. May watched her go, the half-eaten sandwich in her lap, her throat thick with something she couldn't name. For a long while, she didn't move. The bench was still cold, the park still indifferent, but the sandwich was real. The kindness was real, and the name Oliver that was real too. She folded the wax paper neatly and slipped it into her coat pocket like it mattered. The next morning didn't start with hope. It started with cold socks and a headache from sleeping on hard library floors. May had spent the night tossing between two chairs, bundled in her coat, her backpack beneath her head, and a folded newspaper tucked under her legs to block the draft that never seemed to leave the building. Her stomach cramped with a dull ache, not the sharp, urgent kind she'd learned to ignore, but the slow, hollow burn that came from days of not quite enough. When she stepped outside into the gray light of early morning, she didn't expect anything to be different. But she remembered the woman Nora and the sandwich that had felt like a lifeline wrapped in wax paper. That memory alone was enough to pull her feet in the direction of Hearthstone Soup Kitchen. It was a squat brick building tucked between a dry cleaner and an abandoned pawn shop with flaking paint on the trim and a crooked wooden sign that read Hearthstone in faded blue. The windows were steamed from the inside, and for a moment May stood on the sidewalk watching shapes move behind the glass, her hands shoved deep into her coat pockets. She considered walking away, but then she heard laughter, soft, genuine, not the cruel kind she'd grown used to, and something in her shifted. Inside, the warmth hit her first, not just from the stoves which filled the air with the smell of onion and carrots and something vaguely meaty, but from the people. They moved in choreographed chaos, stirring pots, slicing bread, stacking trays. It was messy, loud, and strangely inviting. She was halfway through the door when a voice, low and firm, cut through the noise. "You lost, miss." She turned and found herself staring at a man in a stained apron and a baseball cap turned backward, arms crossed over his chest. His skin was dark like hers, but his eyes had the look of someone who'd lived through enough to stop taking risks on first impressions. "I'm May," she said. "Nora told me to come. Said you might be short on help." The man's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Nora, huh?" "Yeah, older woman, graceful, deadly with a sandwich." That pulled the corner of his mouth up in the faintest smile. He nodded once. "Name's Oliver. You know how to hold a knife." "I can threaten with it," she said dryly, then added, "and I've worked prep in diners before." He looked her over, eyes narrowing just a touch, as if weighing something he wouldn't say out loud. Then he jerked his chin toward the kitchen. "Grab an apron. Let's see if you can peel potatoes without breaking them." She followed him in and was handed an apron by a man humming off-key to a song from a radio propped up on the windowsill. He was tall, olive-skinned, with a beard that needed trimming and a grin that came too easily. "Welcome to the circus," he said, handing her a peeler. "Name's Andre. I'm the kitchen clown slash dishwasher slash bad decision maker. You, May. Like the month or the possibility. Depends on the day. He laughed a loud, unself-conscious sound that made the tension in her shoulders drop half an inch. For the next hour, she peeled potatoes in silence, interrupted only by Andre's commentary on everything from soup consistency to conspiracy theories about how the city only fixed potholes in rich neighborhoods. And maybe it was exhaustion or hunger, or maybe it was just the first time in weeks someone talked to her like a person instead of a problem, but she found herself smiling. Not pretending. Actually smiling. That fragile moment was interrupted when a woman in a crisp white volunteer vest stepped into the kitchen, her eyes landing on May with a flicker of hesitation. She was in her late 20s, blonde, clean fingernails, and wore the look of someone who'd never missed a dentist appointment in her life. "Oliver, who's she?" the woman asked, her voice polite but edged. "She's help," he answered without turning. The woman pressed, "Did she sign the clearance forms? We usually require background checks before." "She's not working with children," Oliver said flatly. "She's peeling potatoes." "But if you have a problem," he said, finally meeting her eyes, "you can go talk to Nora. Or better yet, go find a knife and join us. Potatoes don't peel themselves." The woman flushed slightly and backed out, murmuring something about protocols. May didn't look up, but her hands paused for half a second. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Later, as they scrubbed soup pots in the back, Oliver leaned against the sink and said without looking at her, "People like that, they're not evil, just scared of what they don't know. Scared that if they let someone in without a resume, the whole system might fall apart." And you may ask, "I've seen systems fall apart with perfect resumes. You survived. That's enough paperwork for me." May didn't reply right away. Her hands were wet pruny, and she was standing in shoes that had soaked through 3 days ago, but something in her chest loosened. That night, May didn't go back to the bench. She asked if she could stay late and help clean. When the last pot was dry and the chairs were stacked, Andre handed her a spare sandwich and winked. Payment for a job semi-well done. She took it mumbling thanks and sat outside on the back steps, eating in silence under a flickering porch light. She wasn't full, not really, but she wasn't starving either. And in this city that felt like a small miracle. Before leaving, she turned back to look at the crooked Hearthstone sign and whispered under her breath, "See you tomorrow." And for the first time in weeks, she meant it. The morning routine had begun to settle into something that almost resembled a rhythm. May showed up at Hearthstone just after sunrise, tied on her apron without being asked, and headed to the prep station like she'd always belonged there. She wasn't entirely comfortable yet, not exactly, but there was a strange comfort in the steam rising from the soup pots, in the squeak of knives against cutting boards, in Andre's off-key humming, and in the soft clatter of trays being stacked for lunch service. She liked the sense of motion of hands moving toward something purposeful. It helped her ignore the nagging weight that still sat in her chest, the part of her brain always waiting for something to go wrong. Today, she was peeling carrots, the orange shavings piling up neatly beside her when she heard a voice behind her, low, clear, and completely out of place. "Carrots look better than I expected." She turned slowly. The knife in her hand hovered above the cutting board. Standing in the doorway, framed by morning light spilling through the kitchen window, was the man from the train station. Only he wasn't wet or shivering or asking for help. He was in a tailored charcoal gray coat, a slate blue scarf tucked at his neck, and his shoes were the kind that never walked through bus terminals. His hair was combed, his eyes steady, and in his hand he held a small envelope. Robert Dawson. May didn't say anything for a beat. She took him in, registering the change, the impossibility of it. It was the same man, the same eyes, but it was like someone had cut away everything that made him feel familiar. Her heart didn't race. It dropped. "I must have overpaid you," she said finally, dry and slow, "because that glow-up is beyond $10. His mouth curved just slightly, not a smile, not really. "I was hoping I'd get to thank you properly." She raised an eyebrow, set down her knife, and wiped her hands on the apron. People usually say thanks when they take the money, not after they make the Forbes list. He stepped forward, held out the envelope. "It's not money." "Not exactly." She didn't take it. She waited. Robert cleared his throat, almost self-conscious, like the room had gotten smaller somehow. "It's the 10 you gave me." "I kept it. Had it laminated, actually." That got her. Her eyes flicked down to the envelope, and sure enough, through the thin paper, she could see the faint outline of a crinkled bill, now stiff and preserved. "You laminated it?" she asked, more confused than impressed. "I needed to remind myself," he said. "That day I didn't believe in people. You didn't know me. You gave it anyway. Not a question, not a lecture. Just handed it over and walked away. She crossed her arms, still not taking the envelope. I also called you Railway Jesus in my head. That doesn't make me a saint. He laughed quietly. The sound was different now, lighter, but not less real. I didn't come here to make you uncomfortable, he said. I run a foundation. Dawson Foundation. We're working on a few local initiatives housing support food access community outreach. I'd like you to come in, consult, maybe do some community liaison work. May narrowed her eyes. You want to hire me? I want you to meet the team. No promises either way. Just talk. Have coffee. No strings. Except maybe the apron if you insist on peeling carrots like that. She let out a long breath, looking at him like she was trying to read fine print on a crooked contract. Why me? Because you didn't wait for a resume before helping me, he said. Because you knew what I needed in that moment, and I think people like that. They don't just survive. They lead. May finally reached out, took the envelope, weighed it in her hands. I don't usually accept interest on kindness, but for you, I might make an exception. He smiled. Not wide, just enough. We're at Broad and 5th, top floor, anytime after 9. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked back at her cutting board, then back at him. I don't wear suits. Good, he said. Everyone in suits there could use someone who doesn't. And then he was gone. No dramatic exits, no business cards dropped like breadcrumbs. Just a nod and a quiet slip through the doorway. Later that day, when lunch rush slowed and May sat on the back steps with her sandwich and Andre snoring on the crate beside her, she opened the envelope again. The laminated 10 stared back at her like it had been waiting. She didn't believe in fate, but she believed in timing. And this felt like something close. The next morning, she stood across the street from the Dawson Foundation building, coffee in hand, coat buttoned to the top. The building stretched upward, all glass, and angles its name in brushed silver near the revolving doors. She didn't step forward. Not yet. She stared at her reflection in the glass, saw the woman with tired eyes and a stiff jaw and 1,000 second guesses in her head. She took a slow breath. Then she crossed the street. May stood in the elevator staring at the numbers lighting up one by one as the floors ticked by. Her reflection in the mirrored wall looked composed, but she could feel the thrum of nerves in her palms and at the base of her neck. She had chosen her outfit carefully clean pressed slacks, borrowed from a donation bin, a blouse with a collar that still held its shape, and shoes that barely pinched when she walked. Her hair was tied back. Her expression was neutral. She was used to being observed, but today she felt like she was walking into a place where the eyes wouldn't just look, they would measure. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime onto the top floor. The Dawson Foundation's headquarters was nothing like the warmth of Hearthstone. It was sleek, sterile, and designed to impress. Pale oak floors, glass walls, brushed steel finishes. The kind of place where even the quiet had an expensive hum. She stepped out and walked past a white reception desk where a young woman with a headset gave her a polite, distracted smile and asked if she needed help. I have a meeting with Robert Dawson, May said. Name? May Brooks. The receptionist clicked something on her tablet, then nodded toward a glass-walled conference room at the end of the hall. They're expecting you. May thanked her and walked toward the room, her footsteps echoing softly on the polished floor. Through the transparent walls, she could see 4 people seated around a long oval table. Robert sat at the far end, his jacket folded neatly over the back of his chair shirt sleeves rolled just enough to show he wasn't here to be ornamental. He looked up as she entered and smiled, calm, steady, not patronizing. She appreciated that. May he said, standing. Glad you came. The others turned. Grace Tanaka, slim, sharp, and quietly observant, offered a small nod. She wore a simple navy dress and no jewelry, but her posture spoke volumes. Connor Whitman, blonde, early 20s, with the air of someone who never had to prove he belonged, gave her a bright, too-quick smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. And Evelyn Moore, immaculate in a tailored ivory suit and pearl earrings, sat back with her fingers steepled under her chin, examining May, like a puzzle piece she wasn't sure fit the board. Robert gestured to the empty seat beside him. Please take a seat. May did, setting her bag on the floor and folding her hands in her lap. The table was cool under her wrists. She kept her spine straight. We've been reviewing our community outreach initiatives, Robert said, addressing the group. I've asked May to join us as a potential consultant. She has first-hand insight into the systems we're trying to impact. Connor leaned forward, smile wide. That's fantastic. Lived experience is so valuable. It's real. Grace said nothing, just watched. May felt her gaze not as intrusion, but as calibration. Evelyn, however, didn't mask her skepticism. "We all appreciate powerful narratives," she said, her tone smooth and measured. "But when dealing with grants and public accountability, we also need people with experience managing programs, budgets, data, not just stories." May smiled faintly. "Some of us live enough experience in one winter to rival a whole fiscal year. But I get your point." Connor chuckled awkwardly, then cleared his throat. Grace's lips twitched almost imperceptibly. Robert didn't interrupt. He let the moment settle eyes on May, letting her answer in her own terms. That alone made her respect him a little more. May turned to Evelyn, still calm. "I'm not here to replace your spreadsheets. I'm here because someone finally realized numbers don't scream when they're hungry." The room stilled. Connor fidgeted with his pen. Grace finally spoke. "May, what would you change about the way we approach food insecurity in Eastbridge?" May answered without hesitation. "Stop calling it outreach like it's one-directional. You reach out, but you don't reach back. Communities aren't waiting to be saved. They're surviving despite you. You want trust, invest in dignity. Not just meals, but voice." Grace nodded slowly. "That's fair." Evelyn leaned back. "And what's your plan for sustaining that voice? Funding isn't infinite." May shrugged. "Neither is patience, but it's lasted longer than most of your pilot programs." There was a silence after that, not hostile, not even tense, just the sound of air shifting when someone says something true. After the meeting, Robert walked her to the elevator. "You didn't hold back. Was I supposed to?" "No," he said. "That's why I asked you here." May glanced back at the conference room. "Evelyn's not a fan. She funds half the programs. She's not supposed to be a fan. She's supposed to ask hard questions. You gave hard answers. That's more useful than another report." They reached the elevator. She pressed the button. "I don't know if I belong here," she said quietly. Robert looked at her serious. "Neither did I for a long time. But maybe that's exactly why we should be here." The doors opened. She stepped in, and he didn't follow. Just gave her a nod the same as he had in the kitchen at Hearthstone. As the elevator descended, May let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Her hands were still her heart steady. She didn't know if she would say yes, but she knew this much for once: the table hadn't felt too high. And that was a start. The following week arrived not with fanfare, but with a plain manila envelope slid across May's table at Hearthstone. Robert had come alone. No suit, no entourage, just slacks, sleeves rolled, and an earnestness she hadn't seen before. Inside the envelope was a draft, an early proposal for a community engagement program, hand-marked with red ink and coffee stains, like someone had actually lived in the margins. "I want to fix this," he said plainly, watching her read. "Not just the document, the whole approach." May kept her tone even. "This isn't fixing, this is starting over." Robert nodded. "That's what I meant." The proposal wasn't bad, but it was still written like a plan meant to impress donors, not lift communities. She tapped her finger on one sentence. "You still call them at-risk individuals. Not people, not names. That's a problem." He didn't defend himself, just nodded again, slower this time. "Will you help me rewrite it?" She paused. There was a satisfaction in saying no, in making the man who once begged for $10 wait for her charity. But that wasn't who she was. That was never the point. "Fine," she said. "But we do it my way. We go out there, talk to people, eat their food, listen. No polished presentations, just presence." "That's exactly what I want," he said, and she believed him, or at least wanted to. They started with Eastbridge's Hollow Row, a cluster of apartment buildings once meant for veterans, but now left half abandoned, paint peeling, like old skin stairwells heavy with the smell of mildew and resignation. The last time Robert had been there, he'd stood at a podium in a pop-up tent, surrounded by banners and cameras, announcing a pilot program that would revitalize community health through accessible technology. Within 6 months, the Wi-Fi stations were gone, the community garden fenced off due to insurance complications, and no one ever returned a single follow-up call. Now he returned with no fanfare, just a notebook and May. She didn't guide him like a tour leader. She just walked beside him, pausing now and then to greet someone by name, asking after children, cracked knees, overdue bills. People recognized her, not as a savior, but as one of their own. They saw Robert and looked twice, some with confusion, others with quiet contempt. Mrs. Delaney, who lived on the second floor with 3 cats and a reputation for speaking her mind, saw them pass and hollered from her window, "Well, look who crawled out of the headlines." Robert stopped, looked up. "Ma'am, you made a pretty speech last year." she snapped. "Gave my grandson a pamphlet and a free app. Then y'all vanished like it was just another press shoot. So, what now?" "You here to apologize." He opened his mouth, then closed it. There wasn't a speech for this. May said nothing didn't step in. She let the silence stand. Mrs. Delaney's voice dropped. "You want to help Mr. Dawson, then stop smiling like you get points for showing up." Robert nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." They moved on. Robert said nothing for 2 blocks. Then, under his breath, "I deserve that." May didn't gloat. She looked ahead. "Welcome to our side of the table." That night, they sat in the corner of a family-owned taqueria May had known since her college days, writing notes on napkins between bites of rice and beans. Robert chewed slowly as if tasting more than food. "This was never in the job description," he said finally. "That's because the job was always written by people who didn't eat here," May replied. She jotted down a line and pushed the napkin toward him. "We don't give voice to the voiceless. We remove the hand that's been covering their mouths." He read it twice, then folded it and slipped it into his pocket like something sacred. The next day, they met with Oliver back at Hearthstone. Robert hadn't been there since the stormy night. May handed him a crumpled 10. Oliver's look was neutral, arms crossed, but not cold. "He says he wants to help again," May said simply. Oliver didn't respond immediately. He stirred a pot of lentils, steam rising between them. "You ever clean out a sink full of rot?" Oliver asked, not looking at Robert. "Yes." "Then you know. You don't get to walk in with cologne and fix the smell. You roll up your sleeves, dig in, and you stink like the rest of us before you earn the right to call it clean." Robert took off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves. "Where do you want me?" Oliver handed him a mop. May caught Andre grinning from the pantry. "Now it's a party," he said. For the rest of the afternoon, Robert worked without asking for photos, credit, or comfort. He mopped, he scrubbed. He got yelled at by Andre for stacking cans in the wrong order. And when it was done, he sat with May on the back steps again, 2 sandwiches between them and the dusk curling quietly around the building. "You're not bad at this," she said, taking a bite. "I'm better when I shut up and listen." May smiled, then turned serious. "This can't be a project. It can't be a redemption arc. This has to be a shift." He looked at her steady. "I don't want to be the one who saves anyone. I just want to stop doing harm, pretending to help." They sat in silence a moment longer. "You think they'll trust you again?" she asked. "I don't know. Maybe not, but I trust you. And maybe that's the only way to begin again." And that night, for the first time, May didn't dream of falling. She dreamed of building. It wasn't until her 3rd week walking into the Dawson Foundation that May saw a familiar figure moving through the hallway, like she owned nothing and yet knew every corner. The slow, graceful gait, the cardigan draped across her shoulders, and that face lined steady, familiar in a way that made the morning blur with memory. May blinked twice before realizing it was Nora, her Nora, the one with the sandwich, the one with the eyes that looked at hunger and didn't flinch. She paused in the middle of the corridor, folder in hand, still smelling faintly of lentils from Hearthstone that morning. The echo of her steps faded as Nora turned and met her gaze. No surprise. Just that same quiet recognition, like 2 people seeing each other again at the end of a long story neither had planned to share. May approached slowly, almost unsure if she should speak first. "You work here?" she asked, finally, voice lower than intended. Nora smiled gently, a hint of tired mischief behind it. "On and off. They call me a community consultant, which I think just means old woman who's hard to ignore." May laughed before she meant to. "You're Robert's mother." Nora's eyebrows lifted slightly, not in surprise, but as if the moment had simply arrived. "Yes, I am." May blinked again, confused. "Wait, how?" Nora tilted her head, amused. "You've seen that photograph in the Foundation's hallway, the one near the donor wall." May nodded slowly. There had been a framed picture she had passed a dozen times Robert as a child, around 7 or 8, grinning with a missing tooth, his arm around a tall woman in a floral dress. May had noticed the dress, and now, seeing Nora in person, she realized it was the same smile, the same eyes. "You didn't say anything back then. You didn't ask." There was no accusation in it, just fact delivered the same way Nora had handed her that sandwich weeks ago, with no strings and no explanations. It occurred to May in that hallway painted too white that the people who shaped the most lives rarely announced themselves. Later that day, during a break between strategy sessions, those sanitized boardroom gatherings where even good intentions had name tags, May found Nora alone in a courtyard behind the Foundation. The woman sat on a bench beneath a barely blooming magnolia tree, unwrapping a tin of almonds with the same care someone else might handle crystal. May sat beside her without asking. For a while, they didn't speak. They just watched a sparrow hop near a coffee cup someone had forgotten on the edge of a planter. Eventually, May said, "You always just show up, don't you, right when it matters?" Nora chewed another almond. Showing up isn't magic. It's just paying attention. May tilted her head. "You and Robert, are you close?" A long breath. "Not heavy, but not light either. We've always seen the same horizon. We just have different roads in mind." May waited. When he was a boy, Nora continued, her voice quieter now. He wanted to fix everything. Every stray dog, every broken swing set. He thought justice came with a blueprint. And I wanted to believe him. I did. And then, there was a girl, Nora said. Her name was Lenora. Young, bright. I worked with a group trying to help women transition out of substance dependency. Lenora had been clean 8 months. We got her into community college. I helped her find a job. And then, one night, she didn't show up. They found her 2 days later. She didn't have to finish. May's stomach nodded anyway. I stopped doing programs after that. I just started handing out sandwiches, listening, sitting. Because somewhere in the noise, I realized I wasn't saving anyone. I was just giving them one more day to try again. May's voice caught. "That's what you did for me." Nora turned to look at her fully then. And look what that bought me. She said it with no pride, but with a quiet astonishment, like someone watching a plant bloom in a patch of soil they thought was too poor to hold anything. May felt something sting behind her eyes and blinked hard. This wasn't gratitude. It was something deeper, something like legacy. Back inside, during the next meeting, May watched Robert speak to a panel of regional partners. His tone was steady focused, but there was a subtle shift in how he referenced the work. Less metrics, more people. And when he said "we," he gestured toward the community board that May had helped assemble, that Oliver sat on, that Andre had dropped in to speak at last week. Robert was learning. Slowly, imperfectly, but sincerely. After the presentation, May caught Nora again, this time standing by the reception desk, flipping through a binder of printed grant summaries. "You ever think about doing more again?" May asked. Nora gave her that half smile. "I think I am. Every time I pass a plate. Every time I don't lecture someone who's high but hungry." May nodded slowly. "I didn't mean it as a challenge. I didn't take it as one. But if I were younger, I'd probably chase your energy like wildfire." They both laughed. "Robert's lucky," May said finally. "He's determined," Nora replied. "Luck is what brought me to that train station. Determination is what made him stay standing in the rain." May considered that. "Maybe he got that from you." "Maybe." Nora touched her arm briefly before turning. "But what he learns from you, that's something I couldn't teach." As Nora walked away, May stood still, letting that sentence echo inside her. In a building where walls echoed authority, where the polished floors smelled of control, there was something deeply grounding about realizing she was part of a chain of people who had done the small things that mattered long before any of this had names or grants or mission statements. She was not a miracle, but she was proof that even the smallest kindness planted in the worst of soil could bloom eventually. That was enough. The envelope with Robert's offer remained untouched for 2 days, sitting on May's nightstand like a question she was too tired to answer. Each time she glanced at it, a ripple of conflict rose in her chest. It wasn't just the job title or the city or the salary. It was the idea of leaving something unfinished, of walking away from people who still needed someone to believe in them. On the 3rd day, as Hearthstone began its weekly prep for the street outreach, May folded clean blankets and filled brown paper bags with canned beans, bread, and a piece of fruit. Danielle wasn't there. She hadn't shown up since Thursday. Her cot remained stripped, a silence heavy around it. Nobody said anything, but the looks exchanged among staff spoke louder than any confirmation. At dusk, May took a walk around the block just in case, but Danielle was nowhere to be found. That night, as May sat with a cup of tea she couldn't finish, a call came in from a local precinct. Danielle had been found unconscious in a public park, barely breathing, and was taken to the emergency room. No one knew where her baby was. Heart thundering, May ran to Hearthstone's nursery. The child Kayla was there, left earlier that morning by a volunteer who had found her crying outside Hearthstone's gates. Cold, hungry, but alive. May held the child until she stopped shaking. For 2 nights, May barely slept. She stayed at the shelter checking on Kayla every hour, organizing the other volunteers, checking in with nurses at the hospital. Danielle remained unresponsive. A part of May, the tired part, whispered, "You gave everything," and she still chose to walk away. But each time that thought formed, it was eclipsed by Kayla's small, sticky hand grasping her sleeve, the way her dark eyes looked not with blame, but expectation, trust without reason. On the morning of the fourth day, Robert came to Hearthstone. He didn't call ahead. He didn't bring paperwork. He brought coffee and 2 bagels and stood at the gate like someone returning to a memory. May saw him from the front steps, exhaustion carving shadows beneath her eyes. "You're early," she said, accepting the bagel. "You're still here," he said back. "Not for lack of reasons to leave." He sat beside her, elbows resting on his knees. "I didn't mean to drop something so heavy in your lap. I thought maybe it was time you had someone open a door for you." May looked at the bagel in her lap, then at the playground where Kayla now napped in a donated stroller. "And what happens to people like Danielle? What happens to babies like Kayla when doors open for folks like me? They keep needing someone. But maybe that someone doesn't have to be you, not forever. But right now, it does." Robert nodded slowly. Later that day, May walked into Oliver's office. He was going through inventory reports, glasses perched low on his nose. "You look like a woman with questions," he said, not looking up. "I am," she replied. "How do you know when you're not the right person to help anymore?" He set his papers aside, rubbed his temples, then looked at her. "You asking if you should quit or if you're just tired? Maybe both." "May," he said carefully, "what happened with Danielle, it's the kind of thing that makes people think everything they're doing is for nothing. But it's not. You know how many times someone helped me before I finally stayed clean? 5, maybe 6. There was always someone who gave up. One guy didn't. That's the one that stuck." She didn't respond, but something in her posture relaxed. "I don't know what you're supposed to do next," he added, "but I know you can't measure your impact by how many people relapse. You measure it by who comes back." That night, May finally opened the envelope. The title, Regional Director of Dawson Foundation, stared at her from the thick paper. It came with housing assistance, relocation coverage, and a team. All she had to do was say yes. She closed the envelope, set it aside, and pulled out Kayla's drawing from earlier that day. A house, a crooked sun, a stick-figure woman with a big smile and curly hair. May had never worn her hair like that, but Kayla had drawn it from memory. The next morning, May walked into Hearthstone's main office and found Nora at the desk, cataloging donations. "You're early," Nora said with a warm glance. "Had something on my mind." Nora gestured for her to sit. May did. "Robert offered me a job in New York, big title, big reach. And you're here because I'm not sure I can walk away. Not yet, maybe not ever." Nora smiled, but her eyes were serious. "People like us, we don't get to pick the easy roads, but we do get to pick the ones that matter." May nodded. "That's the thing. I think this one still matters." Outside, the city kept moving cars, honking buses, sighing voices in the wind. But inside that office, time slowed just enough for a decision to take root. She would stay. Not because she had no choice, but because someone somewhere needed to know she was still there. Sometimes that was all the difference in the world. 1 year had passed, but the memory was still fresh. The rain, the station, the way his hands had shaken as he took that $10 bill from hers. What May didn't know then, and what Robert never told anyone, was that he never forgot it. After she gave the money back to him weeks later with a lopsided grin and a playful, "Keep it, in case you ever need to borrow from me again," he had taken the bill, pressed it flat between the pages of a book in his home, and eventually had it laminated. He wasn't sentimental, not usually, but that moment had carved something deep in him that he hadn't fully understood until now. Open Hands was no longer just an idea or a borrowed model from Hearthstone. It was its own breathing, growing entity. Under May's stewardship, it had become a network of care that prioritized people over paperwork. It didn't just serve food. It provided second chances, real conversations, a space that didn't make you prove you were worth saving. They had 3 locations now, 1 bus that doubled as a mobile pantry, and a growing team of people who, like May, had once been invisible. The day he returned, it was raining again, though not as hard. May was sitting in the back room doing intake with a woman who didn't meet her eyes. She wore a raincoat that was too big for her and clutched a clear plastic bag of clothes. May spoke softly, listened harder. When she finally stood up, rubbing the base of her neck, she didn't notice Robert until she stepped into the main hall and saw him talking to Andre. Robert looked the same and different, less pressed, more grounded, like someone who had stopped trying to prove he belonged in every room. His eyes met hers across the space, not with a dramatic pause, but with the calm of someone who had waited to be here again and didn't need to rush. Did you forget how doors work? May said, crossing her arms, but her mouth twitched. I thought I'd use the back one, he replied. You always seem to catch people better that way. Andre, picking up the cue, disappeared into the kitchen. May walked closer, her steps' steady eyes narrowing. What brings you back? She asked. Don't tell me your foundation ran out of ideas again. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small wooden box, smooth and worn like something made to last. He didn't hand it to her. He set it on the table between them. Before you decide anything, he said, I want you to see what's inside. May lifted the lid. The laminated $10 bill lay on a soft piece of linen, perfectly centered. Next to it, a folded document. She picked it up slowly, reading it without speaking. It was a formal agreement co-founder status for a new initiative that would scale Open Hands nationally. Not a pilot, not a study. A real resourced program. Her name was listed first. She didn't speak for a long time. When she did, her voice was low. Why me? Robert didn't hesitate. Because you believed in people before they earned it, because you saw me before I earned it, and because you never asked to lead, which means you probably should. May leaned back, arms crossed again. I'm not a CEO. I'm not even comfortable in most of your meetings. I don't do PowerPoint. You don't need to, he said. You do people, and that's what this is about. She let out a breath, long and slow. You know I can't leave Open Hands. You don't have to, Robert said. This expands from here, not instead of it. He looked down, then back at her. I don't want a new program. I want to invest in the one thing that actually worked. There was a pause, then the kind of silence where no one rushes to fill it. May closed the box and placed her hand over the lid. I'll think about it, she said. I know, he replied. She tilted her head, smiling slightly. That was a hell of a $10 investment. Robert smiled back. I'm still paying interest. They didn't hug. They didn't need to. The space between them was already smaller than it had been. Later that night, May sat in her office, the box on her desk. She thought about every person who had walked through her doors, about Danielle, about Kayla, about the girl today in the raincoat. She opened the laminated bill again, ran her fingers along the edge. It wasn't money anymore. It was memory, proof that small things held weight. She picked up a pen and scrawled a note at the bottom of the agreement, only if we keep the soup hot and the doors unlocked. Then she signed her name. When Andre came in to ask about next week's deliveries, she handed him the box. Take care of this, she said. We've got work to do. And he did. And they did. Because some partnerships don't start with contracts or cocktails. Sometimes they start with a gesture on a rainy day. A bill passed between strangers. A risk taken before the proof. And sometimes those are the ones that last. Spring came late that year, the kind of stubborn season that arrived on its own terms. The trees outside Open Hands were beginning to bud, tentative and soft green, like they too were trying to believe it was safe to grow again. Inside the center, the mood was lighter, though not without its cracks. Healing was like that, uneven, surprising, and sometimes silent. May stood in the kitchen, watching Danielle's daughter Kayla tie paper flowers onto the window grates. Her small fingers worked carefully, tongue poking out the side of her mouth in concentration. She didn't know her mother had written May a letter from rehab the week before. She didn't know it would take longer than expected. But she laughed when May showed her how to twist the pipe cleaners into curls, and for now, that was enough. Robert had been coming by more often, never with a press team or a schedule. Just him, sleeves rolled up sometimes, helping Andre unload deliveries, sometimes reading grant proposals in the noisy front hall, like the chaos helped him think better. May watched him not because she didn't trust him, but because she still couldn't quite believe it. People didn't usually stay. People usually meant well and moved on. But he was still here. One Friday afternoon, May sat in her office reading a printout of the new national rollout plan Robert's team had polished. It was good. Better than good, actually. Scaled to protect integrity, not just expand size. She circled 3 lines with a red pen, small adjustments. Then she set it down and looked at the clock. 5:30. Outside, she heard someone knock on the kitchen door. It wasn't delivery day. She went to open it. It was Grace Tanaka, in her usual structured jacket, clipboard in hand, hair tucked neatly behind one ear. May's eyebrows rose. Did the foundation run out of coffee? Grace didn't smile, but her tone softened. I wanted to see it myself. The rollout, what you're building. May stepped aside. Then, come in. But fair warning, our conference room has folding chairs and a cat named Muffin who sleeps on the budget binder. Grace followed her in slower than usual. She paused near the main hallway, looking at a wall of photos, not of donors, but of clients who had returned to volunteer, or gone back to school, or reconnected with family. May waited. Grace said, "You don't polish your stories here, do you?" May turned to her. "No, we just live them." Later, they sat in the back room, the one that doubled as a break room and once held boxes of instant soup. Now it held plans, hopes, and 1,000 sticky notes. "I'm not here in an official capacity," Grace said. "Off the record even." May looked her straight in the eye. "So, what's the unofficial word?" Grace hesitated. "When Robert first brought your proposal, some of us thought he was emotional, that it was about guilt." May didn't flinch. "Was he wrong?" "No," Grace said quietly. "But maybe that's not a bad place to start if you're willing to grow from it." There was silence, then a soft rustle as Muffin climbed onto the windowsill. Grace said, "The board wants results, but I think the results are already happening, and I wanted to say that before anyone else turned it into a bullet point." May blinked. She wasn't used to that kind of honesty from people in pressed suits. "Thank you," she said. Grace stood. "I'll be back. Next time I'll bring coffee. And I want to see that bus you mentioned." "You drive?" May asked. "Not well," Grace replied, and this time she did smile. The next week, Connor Whitman stopped by, sheepish. He brought a check from a donor who'd seen May's story online. He also brought 3 college students who wanted to volunteer. "We figured it out," he said. "It's not about saving, it's about showing up." May raised an eyebrow. "Took you long enough?" He nodded. "Yeah, I was slower than I thought." They all laughed, and then they worked. At the end of the month, Nora hosted a quiet dinner in her garden for the whole staff. It wasn't fancy. Paper plates, bowls of chili. Robert grilled badly. May teased him until he handed over the tongs. As the sun set and the porch lights came on, people told stories. Not the ones that made headlines. The ones that made healing feel possible. The ones about surviving awkward beginnings, cold nights, and days when one sandwich made all the difference. May sat on the porch steps looking out over the backyard. She thought about how the story had started wet cold, uncertain. Now it was still messy, still unfinished, but it was real. Robert joined her holding 2 glasses of lemonade. "You ever think," he said, "what if it hadn't rained that day?" May took the glass. "Then maybe we'd have met on a sunny one. I still would have given you the $10. You looked like a sad lost puppy." He laughed. "You never make anything sound romantic." "I don't have to," she said. "Life does enough of that without help." They sat in silence a while. Then Robert spoke again. "You were right, you know. We don't fix the world by loving each other." May turned to him. "But it helps not to do it alone." He nodded. "Yeah, it does." And the night settled around them, like an old friend, quiet, a little worn, but still here, still staying. Because some stories don't end. They just keep getting passed on one hand to another, one kindness at a time. Thank you for walking every step of this journey with us. If you've made it this far, it's because stories like this, one-touching stories, soul-stirring stories, matter to you. Maybe it reminded you of someone. Maybe it left something in your chest, quiet but unforgettable. We'd love to hear what moved you, what part stayed with you. Where in the world are you watching from, wherever that may be? We're deeply grateful for your time, your heart, and your presence here. This may be the end of this chapter, but it's only the beginning of what's next. There are more emotional stories, more heartwarming love stories, more moments that stir something real. Until then, thank you for your support, your kindness, and your belief in stories that say even a single act of courage, like lending her last $10 to a stranger at the train station, can shape a life and sometimes change the course of another. We'll see you in the next one.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.